a 1994 RX-7 base, original Chassis white 5-speed car.
You mentioned before we started recording that it's like one of 54 white ones they made for that year.
Yeah, 94 in the base model, which is important because there's no sunroof. So tall guys, like if you're in the 95th percentile, you want that extra 1 inch of headroom that the sunroof cassette normally would take up. So base model, no sunroof, 5-speed in white. They only made 54 of them.
Did you buy it for a project?
Yes and no.
It became a project, obviously.
So I got it in 2013, and it's been a long road since then. And originally I got it because it was more of a means to an end. I never really dreamed of having an RX-7 as a kid. I wanted a Supra. Supras are a little bit on the expensive side, so I went with the RX-7, and then the more I did to it and the more I learned about it, it grew on me, and now I don't think I'd get rid of it for a Supra. So the car's originally from Ocala, Florida, and that's about where the good stuff ends. The wiring harness, which is a well-known problem with RX-7s, they get really hot and brittle and they start to break apart. But the previous owner in Florida did a lot of like really shoddy wiring work. When I started to dig into it, I found there were resistors that were from Radio Shack. They were ceramic block resistors that he soldered in for the secondary injectors to match the resistance needs of the Apexi Power FC that was in it. They were basically falling apart. The injectors, I have no idea how they were hanging on. The coolant temperature sensor was barely hanging on by a thread. All stuff that you really can't see until you take it apart. Over the past 2 years, I've completely torn the car apart and built it back up again. I've now done everything on the car except for build the engine myself, only because it's the original engine that was still built from 8 years ago by Carlos Gonzalez at GNS Racing down in Ocala, Florida. He's a pretty well-known rotary drag racer from back in the day with RX-3s. It's a pretty bulletproof motor. I've not been nice to it. It becomes, at a certain RPM, pretty violent. I previously had Hondas, grew up on Hondas, started with Hondas, and had a 98 Integra Type R. I went down to the tail of the Dragon with it, and I felt I could push that car as hard as I wanted, and we were in it together. We had an understanding. With this car, the understanding is it's okay if it kills me at any second, but that's kind of the edge we walk.
So where'd you start?
At the time, I was renting a garage that had no power, no lights, nothing. So I was working with a generator outside, running an electrical cord in. I could barely see anything, but I knew that I wanted to get at least the exterior where I wanted it. That meant getting rid of the factory spoiler because it looks terrible. I did the feed side sills, the R1 front bumper, the lip. That was pretty much it exterior-wise that I changed. Other than that, I just fixed the intake that was kind of botched up on it, upgraded the radiator. That was one of the other first things. The car's been with me through a lot. It's been through 3 different houses at this point, and then when I finally bought a house with a nice garage is when I really tore into it and tore it down to just the engine block sitting in there. I did the Rye-Wire mil-spec harness and a bunch of other upgrades, and at that point is when it really started to come alive, start to run like it should. When I got the car, it had an Apexi Power FC, and it had an old school Turbonetics 62-1 single turbo on it. The good thing was it was single turbo when I got it, but the turbo manifold was a cheap eBay manifold that was all cracked and constant exhaust leaks. I needed to start to address that. So I did it incrementally. I did a custom turbo manifold, redid all of the intercooler pipes again. At that point, I started to make enough power that through first and second gear, it couldn't keep traction. That's when I was like, well, it's time to go Haltech. I did the Haltech Elite last year so I could control boost by gear and have a little bit of a hope for traction. And at that point, I was like, well, I got Haltech, so why not add some more fuel and some more boost? Then I tore it apart again, and that's when I did the Turbolone TDX 61R, which is a custom turbo built by Garrett for Turbolone, comparable to a GTX 3582. With the billet compressor wheel dual ball bearing setup.
When did you do the roll cage and all that stuff?
I just finished
the car tried to kill you, right?
Yeah. Well, I just did the roll bar, finished it up about 2 weeks ago. And it's part of needing to make more than one pass without getting kicked out of the track. At this point at the power level, it should do mid-10s. I'm waiting for Keystone to open up again, and I'm either gonna make a good pass or make a good mess. That's another interesting thing is when I started to make more power, I started to find things that you don't think fail, but they do. The car had H&R race springs on it when I got it, and from making more power in the rear end squatting hard, the thing about coil springs is when they kind of get past that point where they no longer have the elasticity, they fail in a way that the diameter expands. So while I was working on the car, I looked underneath and my rear coil springs were just barely on the perch. The diameter had expanded so much that they were almost slipped off of the shock body. So at that point, I did tine coilovers. Then I also picked up the Ray's Graham Light 57 Ds that were originally spec'd out for an RX-7, and they were on a Mazda 6, and I picked them up. They were spray painted, so I had the guys up at Totally Baked did an awesome job with powder coating them Volk Magnesium Blue. 10.5 inch wide in the rear and 9 inch wide in the front. Tires are 275 35/18s out back. NT05s now, but I'm going to need to go to 888s. The brakes are power stop drilled and slotted rotors with power stop pads. Nothing super special there. Factory 4-piston calipers up front.
How much does the car weigh? It's heavy, right?
2,700 pounds roughly. Last year when it got retuned on the Haltech with the new turbo and everything, it made 498 and 498 wheel horsepower and 415 foot-pounds of torque on the Mustang dyno out there. The important thing there is that's on pump gas. I live in the middle of nowhere, so E85 is not an option unless I start storing barrels in my garage, and the car gets 11, 12 miles per gallon, so race gas also is not a very economical option. That was my goal, is it needed to make lots of power and it needed to do it on pump gas. Everything has its price.
You do that a lot.
At this point, I've put so much work into it that, like, looking around and seeing all the different things I've done, it's hard to let that go. I'm still an enthusiast at heart. Money aside, it'd be like painting a beautiful picture and then, selling it. I kind of wanted to do the car kind of like how I am. I'm kind of like, low key, nothing flashy about me.
Till you step on the gas.
Yeah.
What makes it special? Why this car? Why not an S2000? I know you were a Honda guy.
I have always loved S2000s, but it came down to this car was in the right place at the right time for the right amount of money. I couldn't pass it up. When I saw it in person in white, that's when it hit me. And I was like, there's something different here.
What do you like better? Driving it or just looking at it?
I do like driving it, but I do find myself sometimes I just pop open the garage door and I'm like, looks pretty good.